Hey again guys, Kuro here. Welcome back to another video, and thank you so much for checking out my channel. I am the owner of Kimono Dungeon Fursuits, and if you are new here, welcome. And if you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for coming back. I'm so glad my videos are entertaining you. But in this week's video, I wanted to talk about some totally unrequired tools to make fursuits that I would buy if I had some f*** you money. So in my last video I did about tools, I did some must-have items that all fursuit makers should have from the start. And I wanted to do another video of some extra toys, I suppose, extra tools that are totally unrequired to make a suit, but would make certain very niche parts of the building process much easier, much better, really up your game, that are not required to make a suit, but if you have extra money, might be something to save up and get. So I want to start off with the first item, which is a vacuum pot or a pressure pot for resin casting. And there's several different types. A vacuum pot and a pressure pot are different. One pushes in air and one sucks air out. And depending on what type of material you're using, I think one is better than the other, and I can't remember off of the top of my head. I'm sure I'll put which one is there, but each have applications for casting different products. So those I feel are very helpful if you want clean, bubble-free casts, but they are not required at all in order to make a suit. The next one on this list is a 3D printer. Now, I already have a 3D printer, so I also wanted to include a belt 3D printer, which is sort of like a continuous printer in that you can build, let's say you could build a whole sword, whereas with normal 3D printers, you would have to build that sword in pieces because a standard 3D printer only goes XYZ, whereas the belt printer will push that piece forward so you can build and print really, really long prints, so it's one solid sword rather than breaking that sword up into 3, 5, 8 pieces. So both of those are completely unnecessary, whether it's a normal 3D printer or a belt 3D printer, completely unnecessary to build suits. But I myself use my standard 3D printer to literally make my head bases, so I use it all the time. So for me personally, it is a necessity. But most fursuit makers will build their heads out of foam or resin, so you don't necessarily have to have a 3D printer in order to make suits. And kind of a sub piece of this, which I guess would kind of apply to me and anyone that does a lot of 3D printing for fursuit making, is getting a second and third 3D printer or adding a resin 3D printer to your game. Obviously having more 3D printers means that you can print more, you're more efficient, you're able to churn out more product if you sell product, and then if you have a resin 3D printer, you can get really high detail prints on a smaller scale. So like if you want really high detail horns or really high detailed eyes, like resin eyes, or high detailed taxidermy quality jaw sets, resin 3D printing would be really, really good for that, or for claws. I mean, there's so much that you could do, and I feel like I'm only describing very limited stuff off the top of my head since this video is pretty much unscripted, but that would be a little subset of the 3D printer point. The next one on this list would be a precision detail airbrush, or just a regular airbrush if you don't already have an airbrush. Obviously, airbrushing is not needed in order to make fursuits. You can change colors by just sewing, or if you want a gradient, you can dry brush on the fur. You don't need an airbrush in order to do this. But some people like to airbrush their fursuits. This is especially popular with realism fursuits and some toony style suits depending on the look you're going for. A high detail airbrush could also be very, very good for very small markings, very fine lines, and things like that. Again, if you are a realistic fursuit maker, this probably would be an almost necessary item, but still a extra unnecessary item. I'd border it in between, but that would be an extra tool. Next up on this list would be an embroidery machine. And this one is probably justifiable for some suit makers depending on what they do, but if you add accents to your suit, whether that is a patch on the face, embroidered markings or spots around the muzzle, or if you make kigus, an embroidery machine is almost completely necessary. I have even seen people use their embroidery machine to embroider on paw pads. I've seen people use embroidery machines to embroider on butt markings, like how I think it's My Little Pony that has the butt mark. Totally unnecessary for fursuit making, but would be really, really fun to have one. It also could be really cool if you make bandanas as an accessory to go with the fursuit, because you can either embroider a patch of the fursona or embroider their name into the bandana as a extra fun little special touch. Next totally unnecessary tool would be a custom screen printer. And not just a single screen printing frame, but I'm talking like the 4-color, totally legit, totally professional screen printer. Might not have a ton of applications for fursuits, but I'm sure there's something. I've wanted one of these for a while, and maybe it's just a personal thing for me, and maybe literally no other fursuit makers want this, but I think it'd be pretty cool, because then I could make my own like fursuit shirts and send them off with everyone who buys a costume. I think that would be a fun little like marketing item. And I mean, who doesn't love surprises when they get something that they order? I think that would be a fun thing to surprise the buyer with. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But next up, along the lines of a screen printer, would be a t-shirt printer or a sublimation printer. And sublimation has become very, very popular with making fursuit eyes. So totally not necessary, because you can just easily print on buckram from a regular printer, or you can very easily just paint eyes. So sublimation isn't totally necessary, but it does make the eyes a lot more durable. But you do need to buy special paper, use special ink, and of course get a heat press machine in order to do sublimation. So it does require extra tools, extra space, and extra money in order to do something so small as eyes. But very, very cool, very, very fun nonetheless. Next up on this list would be a vacuform machine. And this is another way that you could make head bases. Basically what a vacuform does is you have a mold that you'll place onto this base that has holes so that air can flow through this machine and suck out any air in between the mold and this heated sheet of plastic to create whatever shape you desire. I have seen several fursuit makers use a vacuform machine in order to make their head bases. So basically you'll have like a square sheet of ABS plastic or whatever type of plastic. You heat it up in, don't do it in your oven, but you heat it up, and they have like special like heating machines for this as well. But I emphasize, do not heat it up in your oven, because you can no longer cook food in your oven if you do that. Some reason the plastic interacts weird with the oven. Don't do it. But totally unnecessary way to make fursuit bases, fursuit parts like horns, or any other application that you have. But really, really cool. Makes the head base building process a lot faster, a lot easier, but totally unnecessary and probably very expensive just for that specific process. Next up on this list would be a serger. And I do actually have a serger, but I must admit I've never opened it. It's still in the box. I've had it for 5 years. But when you build bodysuits, serging your fabric, especially if it is a fabric that likes to fray, is fantastic, because this will help increase the longevity of the suit as well as prevent any fraying, ripped seams, anything like that. It's actually a very, very good tool to use if you make a lot of bodysuits, and something worth considering. I would probably say this is one of the first ones if you want to buy something extra to save up for. Along those lines would be my next point, which is an industrial strength sewing machine, like a Juki. Nothing beats Jukis. When I was in college, used a Juki. By God, I loved it. Oh my God, if I could ever have a Juki, I would die. They are strong. They take literally so many layers of fabric. It's impossible, almost. It is possible. I saw someone break one. But it is almost impossible to break them. For a fursuit maker, these powerful freaking machines would be perfect. Of course, because they are industrial strength, most of the time they are only a straight stitch. You can get other machines for other types of stitches, but usually they're a one type of stitch machine, which if you are doing other sorts of applications, or you need something like a zigzag stitch, or you need to make a button or anything like that, having just one stitch is probably too limiting. Also, these take up a ton of space, and since they are industrial strength, they are much more expensive than your standard sewing machine. But those were my totally unrequired tools to make suits that I would buy if I had some extra cash. I did want to throw in 2 little bonus items, but before I do, I just want to say if you are enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as it does really help out my channel and lets me know that the content that I am putting out is enjoyed, informative, and hopefully entertaining. So thank you so much in advance if you do. But anyways, my first bonus item would be a 3D cast of both my head as well as my body, so I literally have to never ever make a duct tape dummy again. Now, this one actually is pretty possible to do and probably one of the more affordable items on this list. Really, all you have to do is buy the plaster cast and the silicone in order to make the mold or whatever is used. I don't know, I haven't looked up the process. But gosh, never having to make a duct tape dummy of myself again would be amazing. Being able to actually stand it upright because it would be rigid and I could use it pretty much as a mannequin would be amazing. I would love that because it's so frustrating to have to stuff, unstuff, restuff, retape, redo a duct tape dummy just to make suits. I hate them. They're the bane of my existence. I'm sure they're the bane of your existence too. But along those lines, I would just love to have a perfectly molded cast of my own head, so when I make myself suits, they fit me perfect. I wish it was cheap enough that commissioners could also do the same, so that they could have a perfectly fit suit literally to their exact measurements, not me padding and unpadding the mannequin head to fit commissioners' heads. It's wishful thinking, and probably only if I had FU money, but nonetheless, it's something I want. And then the second bonus item, which isn't necessarily an item, but a whole ass assistant. I know this isn't a thing I can buy, but technically I would be hiring them and having to pay them a salary. So without making it sound like I'm forcing someone to work. So really, in a way, it's an item that quote unquote can be bought because I would be paying them, but I would love to have help in some aspect of my life because that would be a damn dream. Either if they helped with social media, video editing, fursuit making. I just need myself an assistant. Some days I literally can't respond to comments. So yeah, those are my totally unrequired tools in person to make suits that I would buy or pay if I had extra cash. What would you buy to help you make fursuits if you had extra money? Do you agree with my list? Do you think that these are great extra items that could be bought? Or do you have different ones? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as it does really help out my channel. But that is all for this week, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and if you got to the end of this video, you're amazing. And as always, I am Kuro from Kimono Dungeon Fursuits. I will see you guys next week in the next video. Bye-bye.